How you all doing? How's it going? Do you like the topic? Actually, I gotta go show you the first slide, I guess. Where are we? Oh, I gotta hold on. Uh-huh. Ready for that? Okay. Let's get going. I have a whole bunch of slides, so let's get into it. Yeah, I want to talk about inflation economics. I want to talk about what I call the end of the bailout binge, and also I have some interesting maps that I think a lot of you won't have seen yet about potentially the demographics of Bitcoin. First of all, big picture, these are not at all normal times that we live in. What I'm showing you there in blue is the cover of a little book published in 1988 by Gerald Swanson. It's called the Hyperinflation Survival Guide, and on the inside page he explains why he put that red crazy chart on the cover, and he's saying this is the government debt. He's saying where we are now in 1988, it's at $2.5 trillion, and he projected it at 13 trillion by the year 2000. And he was spot on. If you include unfunded liabilities, he was spot on. I mean, debt has just absolutely exploded. Officially, it's $31 trillion, but really, if you talk to an accountant, they'll say it's actually $160 trillion. And it's not like that debt is all long dated. Like, most of the debt is actually very short dated paper, which means they have to turn it over very quickly. Just to renew the debt, right? As you would, which means government debt is very sensitive to inflation. Very sensitive to interest rates. And so what you see there on the left, that chart is showing you the interest rates on 1-year government bonds, which is now the highest it's been in well over 20 years. So real serious problem. Just to like make it a little more concrete, like imagine the US federal government being a household. They would have about $59,000 in annual income. Their annual expenditures would be $100,000 a year. Like, can you imagine? The outstanding debt, again, extremely conservatively estimated, $416,000. Well, right now, the interest rates are estimated to be over 20% of the tax income of the federal government. That's because of these interest rate rises. This is more than military spending. I'm going to skip the next slide, but if you pause it, if there's ever a video of this, you can just see for yourself the interest rate, the interest payments on the debt jumped 34% in just 1 year. Now, of course, when we read the media, when we look at the news, like clearly there's a lot of denial about what's going on. The White House talks about the immaculate disinflation, which, what is disinflation anyway? It's like, if you actually figure out what it means, it's like, it's not deflation, it's not the inflation like going away, it's just the pace of the inflation slowing down a bit. So it's like the cancer is growing, but a little bit slower. They're talking about there's no recession. I mean, yeah, in an inflationary environment, everything is skewed, so of course you're going to see headlines like this. This is a chart that actually, the one on the right is actually one that Larry, what's his last name again? Yeah, Larry Summers, exactly. Larry Summers shared that one. He's correctly pointing out that inflation comes in waves. Don't expect inflation to be linear. He's comparing current inflation with what we saw in the 1970s. And I think it's kind of a tempting narrative for people to go to now. It's like, oh yeah, we've been here. This is like the 70s. Well, I doubt that this is just a repeat of the 1970s, just like a lost decade, and then, we're gonna have, a brave central banker come in and crank up the interest rates and we'll be fine. It's like, no, we cannot afford to crank up the interest rates, because then bond markets implode. So some of the things that I'm showing here is what we've seen in the year 2020, 2021. We saw the NFT craze. We saw people going insane with flipping houses and trying to get in the housing market. We saw Wall Street bets YOLOing into crazy stocks like AMC and just throwing around money to pump up stocks. And then of course, luxury watches, there was also a craze there. So all that stuff, like what does that really mean? Like, does it mean like people are just losing their minds nowadays? I want to argue that not. I think this is a byproduct of living in an inflationary age. I want to share with you a quote from a book by Bresciani Turroni, who wrote the book The Economics of Inflation. So this is about Weimar Germany. It's about 1920s Germany. I'm going to read the whole quote. To avoid the effect of the monetary depreciation, German farmers continued to buy machines. The, quote, flight from the mark to the machine, as a German author wrote, was the most convenient and easiest means of defense against the depreciation of the currency. But towards the end of the inflation, farmers realized that a great part of their capital was sunk in these machines, whose number was far above what would ever be needed, right? And so that's how I see these things. These are kind of the smaller bubbles with exception of housing, but we actually have seen this across the board for the last 15 years. The money has gotten worse and worse, and so people have been trying to find surrogates, substitutes for saving their money, substitute piggy banks. Of course, real estate is a big one, so we'll look at that. The next chart I'm going to show you is a chart denominated in commodities. And the reason I do that is that I think the dollar is the wrong pair of glasses to put on anymore. If you look at charts in dollar terms, they're long-term charts, all you see is number go up. Like it just goes up and up, and like it doesn't make sense because the denominator is broken. So we need a different way to look at markets. I think Bitcoin is too volatile. I think gold is confusing because the dynamics are changing. So just a basket of commodities does the job for me, because in the end, we all need them to live. We need metals, we need fuel, and of course we need food. So this is real estate, US real estate expressed in commodities. So this chart goes back to just before the 2008 crisis. And so what you see is a 12-year, and note this is a logarithmic chart. So we see a parabolic uptrend that lasted 12 years, fueled by all this stimulus money. And then finally in 2021, the market started to break down. And so even to just go back to 2008 levels, we could easily see a 70% retrace. Same thing happened with global stocks, which, by the way, most of them are consumer focused. They're the Apples, the Amazons, that's all consumerism. So that money was pushed in there. Those green arrows are all the stimulus plans that we saw. Again, we're breaking down. So this is the start of a really big bear market. Of course, the same is the case for government bonds. This is the 30-year bonds expressed in commodities. And then finally, banking. Greatly helped by all the bailouts. They would have been at zero if it weren't for these bailouts. But again, even in commodities, we're also seeing finally it break down. So the point I'm trying to make through this is inflation confuses things. Like people do all kinds of things that feel rational and that are understandable, but that don't necessarily help them. And I want to again quote about the Weimar inflation, because people always think like, oh yeah, it just, gradually there was more and more inflation. Actually, just 1 or 2 years before the hyperinflation, this happened. Quote, the exchange rate of the mark against the dollar and other currencies actually rose for a time, and the mark was momentarily the strongest currency in the world, right? So it gets really confusing. Now, we all know all these slogans of like, oh, full employment, and there's no recession unless we have a 20% drop in the markets. Those are slogans. They don't really make the economy. They're not what's actually happening. I want to actually show you a very short clip of just a regular person who's talking about her experience of everyday life. This is a video from Canada, but I think it speaks for so many places in the US as well. Could you run the video?
I feel trapped and like I just got a good job. I started in September, but even with that job, it pays less than 40 grand a year. And it's a job that requires like education, and even on that job, like I still can't do shit. I can't buy anything. I can't afford the rent these days. Like I'm just feeling so much despair. And I know I'm normally like really, really positive, but I'm just like, how is everyone else, and are you okay? Because the answer is probably no. And I know I'm lucky. I don't have kids. I have like good family that will support me, but I feel like I can't stay here, but I can't move anywhere else.
So people are not just despairing like this lady, as many are, but some people are also getting angry. Does anyone know who this refers to? Oliver Anthony? Yeah, one line of his song is "The dollar ain't shit." I want to talk about him a little bit because I think there may be this may be part of a bigger picture. So just to kind of set the context a little more, I want to read a few quotes from his songs. And the last quote I'm going to read is actually a passage from the Bible that he quoted at the first concert that he did after his video went viral. So, "'Cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, 'cause of rich men north of Richmond." So he's saying the dollar is taxed, so he's talking about inflation. He's also saying people crying about burning coal, which is the climate worries, but not the poor souls who's digging it. So that contrast. There's always some kind of bill to pay, people just doing what the rich man say. And then finally, the wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. So there's that anger and like the ready to go, like ready to somehow do what's needed or fight or, you know, and this is not a partisan message. Like this is not about vote for this guy or vote for that guy. And he makes that clear in this next video.
Well, you know, like it was funny seeing my song in the. It was funny seeing it at the presidential debate because it's like I wrote that song about those people, you know. So for them to have to sit there and listen to that cracks me up. But it was funny kind of seeing the response to it. Like that song has nothing to do with Joe Biden, you know. It's a lot bigger than Joe Biden. That song is written about the people on that stage, and a lot more too, not just them, but definitely them.
So when I learned where he's from, where he lives, it's a little tiny place called Farmville, Virginia. I was reminded of a map that I had looked at a few years ago. There's this book written by Colin Woodard called American Nations, and to me, this is like one of the. Because I didn't grow up in the US and I felt like I had to learn about this continent and how things worked and what the cultures were like. And it seems obvious that there's not like 50 different cultures in the US, like there's less than that, but there's more than 2. And so he has this whole book where he proposes that there's actually 11 distinct cultures in the US, and that the way he makes his argument is that first he shows where the different places were that were colonized and where the migration streams went, and his argument is that you know, whoever sets the tone for the initial culture, that is incredibly persistent because future migration streams, people get either attracted or repelled by the existing culture. So in a way they self-select. And then also he validates it by looking at voting records and just showing that like, hey, even though this is in the same state, there's a line here where people vote differently north versus south, etc. So the map I had in mind was this one. These are like the 11 nations. And so he really makes the argument that it's these ethno-regional nations that really define the political picture in the US. He says, since 1877, the driving force of American politics has been a clash between shifting coalitions of ethno-regional nations, one invariably headed by the Deep South, the other by Yankeedom. So you see Yankeedom as a Northeast, Deep South is, of course, in the south, and then there's these other nations. So what I was thinking of when I listened to Oliver Anthony, his name is Chris, by the way, but it's apparently a homage to his grandfather, who was a musician, is that he's sitting right on the edge of these two nations. One is Greater Appalachia. You see it in the red there above the Deep South, and then to the east of that there's Tidewater, and so Farmville is right on the edge of those two. And I want to read you a little bit about what Colin Woodard says about those two regions. And the reason I bring this up is that basically this is very, I'm very cautiously suggesting this because I put together this presentation like between last night and this morning. So this is not some like big thesis that I've been working on for months. But yeah, is that this dynamic, that has been shaping politics, maybe that dynamic could change somehow. And maybe some of these other regions could have more of a sway in how the votes turn out. So let's read a little bit about Tidewater, which that is where the Richmond, north of Richmond live, right? I mean, that's Washington, D.C. and a little bit around that. So Tidewater, what does Colin Woodard say about Tidewater? He says, Tidewater was led by settlers who were the second sons of the British aristocracy, whose lack of inheritance back in England brought them to the colonies. They sought to recreate their more feudal society in their new homeland. With themselves at the top and indentured servants and enslaved people at the bottom, they sought to create a paternalistic, mannered, class-based society. He says, the Tidewater ethos was that your betters knew best and would take care of you as long as you stayed in your place. Not my words, his. So moving over to Appalachia, which interestingly enough, if you see here, it's a giant region, right? It's 60 million people live there. It includes Nashville, it includes Austin, it includes Dallas. I don't know, I feel like I heard those towns before when people talk about Bitcoin maximalism. So let's see what Colin Woodard has to say about this region and what kind of the cultural blueprint is. He says, the founders of Appalachia came from the war-torn borderlands of northern Britain. Their ancestors had weathered 800 years of nearly constant warfare, some of them fighting in the armies of William Braveheart Wallace. He says, suspicious of aristocrats, social engineers, and outside authority of any kind, borderlanders valued individual liberty and personal honor above all else, and were happy to take up arms to defend either. So I feel like I'm hearing some of that energy in Oliver Anthony's song, and of course in the audiences where that resonate with that. And then last night, actually, I was just browsing on Twitter and I saw this. These migration trends, which I thought I'd throw it in here, because interestingly enough, actually, Appalachia and the Deep South, the metro areas there are seeing a lot of inbound migration at the cost of what Colin Woodard calls Tidewater, Yankeedom, and then the left coast, and also the Midlands. Anyway, so the last part of what I want to talk about is, like, amid this kind of groundswell, this energy, this despair, this anger, what we're seeing is that Bitcoin is entering the political realm. The picture on the left is, of course, Milei, who is the outsider political candidate who just won the primaries in Argentina, and he was on television smashing a piñata in the shape of a central bank. What that image shows is his motosieta clamor. He's basically saying, I'm going to take the chainsaw to the government budget. I'm going to just slash all these parts of the government that are wasteful. He might be the next president. He's pro-Bitcoin. He wants to dollarize the economy. He's an anarcho-capitalist. Of course, here we have several political candidates, several presidential candidates who are being very favorable to Bitcoin now. Robert Kennedy bought Bitcoin for his sons, wants to introduce, I think he wants the central bank to start buying Bitcoin. And then around the world, we're seeing more and more countries that are starting to get involved with Bitcoin in various ways. So I feel like this is the beginning of something new, and there's another demographic element I'll point at in a minute. But in terms of where things might go, it's weird because when I was like thinking about or learning about the economy back in 2005, 6, 7, like I was really very worried and kind of down. I was really worried that we would see the scenario of Latin America played over and over and over. Like we would just go to very high inflation, then like somewhat more stable, then back to very high inflation in these like forever 10-year cycles. So that just felt like a nightmare. And so, yeah, I really thought like maybe Argentina is kind of like the best that's possible, where it was like life still goes on and it's still a good place to live despite all that monetary destruction. But so now with Milei, we're just seeing this something that's very new. Like there's never been a candidate like this that's been as popular with the youth, for example. Like this guy's like a rock star. Like just look at this video. This is in the streets of Buenos Aires. There he is. So that's the phenomenon, Milei. By the way, I heard the word anarcho-capitalist be pronounced on public radio a few days ago. It's really weird. I've never heard it in my life. The lady said she had to look it up in the dictionary. So something else I ran into is this recent survey, and it's about crypto, but let's just assume this is Bitcoin, because they always mush it together, but let's just assume these numbers are about Bitcoin. What they're saying is that basically Democrats own, about 13% of them own Bitcoin, about 10% of Republicans own Bitcoin, and then of the independents, 17% are Bitcoin holders. And so again, those numbers, like between 10 and 17%, like that is really something for me, because this is not at the peak of the bubble. Like this is a bear market that we're in, and to see numbers like that, it reminded me of internet adoption in the early 90s. And so it's too small for you guys to probably see, but what you see there is that in 1995, the internet was adopted by 9% of the people. And then that was the big year where Bill Gates came out and we had Windows 95, and I'm sure a lot of you remember, everybody went to buy their first computer and hook it up. And so the next year, internet adoption jumped to 16%. It was really like a breakthrough moment. Like that was the moment most people agree when the internet went mainstream. And so that's how I feel about Bitcoin. I think this cycle is when Bitcoin is going to go mainstream, because we have that, like, we have what's the germs for popular support. It's there. People are hurting because of inflation, and they're talking about it, and the connection with Bitcoin hasn't quite been made, but I think it will in this next cycle. And I think because of that, it'll be more and more also on the political agenda, for better or worse. You know, like Satoshi didn't want, what was it, WikiLeaks to start accepting Bitcoin because he was afraid Bitcoin would get too politicized too early. But I'm not trying to, you know, like be a prophet and say what needs to happen. This is just what I think will happen. And so that's why I think that there's just no fever like Bitcoin fever. Like I think just like we had gold rushes in the past, this is going to be a mania that's not only fueled by the greed that we saw, because that's always there in 2021, but there's going to be that despair element, there's going to be anxiety, there's going to be anger, like all that is going to get absorbed by Bitcoin is what I believe. So yeah, that's it for me. I'm happy to open it up for questions. And by the way, I'll be around for the rest of the day, so I'm happy to talk to people. So I'm happy to catch up and hear if people want to share things. But for this little part, let's just keep it at just questions, if you wish, if you would. I think that's the microphone over there.
Great speech, appreciate it. If you had to pick a country that you think would adopt Bitcoin, get rid of capital gains, who are you bullish on around the globe?
Wait, could you repeat that? I'm so sorry.
Which country
Oh,
do you think is going to make a next big move in Bitcoin? Whether it's adopting it, legal tender, getting rid of cap gains?
Thanks. Yeah. It's hard to say which country I'm bullish on. It doesn't seem to be that there are political leaders right now of the caliber of Bukele that have already been elected. Like Bukele in El Salvador seems to be a maverick, or seen as such at least. So I think it depends on elections a lot. It seems that most governments are just hesitant, and there's a few countries in Latin America that are really looking at what El Salvador has done, but so far I don't really have a big horse that I'm betting on. Of course, like Argentina is one to watch, even though it does seem like if Milei gets elected president, he might still have a lot of the whatever it's called, the Senate or the Parliament, that could vote against him. So it remains to be seen how much he can actually change. But I think it's just becoming clear that the Bitcoin voters, they could become single issue voters, right? If you live in an inflationary environment, it's like, come on, like liberate my savings. What more important of an issue could you have in a inflationary depression? So, yeah.
If you can come closer over here, the mic.
Oh yeah, for questions, yeah, feel free to come over.
Come on over here.
We have another 4 minutes.
Thanks, Tuur. Insightful as always. I totally agree with you that this Oliver Anthony thing seems to be a marker of a cultural moment of kind of connecting the dots. Do you think that the 2024 election is kind of like too soon for it to become a mainstream issue between the two major political parties? Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. It's hard to say, right? Because if it was like 2025 or 26, I would feel more confident to be like, yeah, for sure, this is going to be the Bitcoin election. But 2024, I don't know, because we could, markets are looking like they're gonna roll over. Like the Fed is saying they're gonna raise interest rates. They won't raise it by much, I don't think, but at least they're kind of signaling they're not going to lower it anytime soon. I think they're waiting for some kind of excuse, like a market sell-off or something like that. And so that means that the like disinflation, quote unquote, could continue for a while. I mean, I guess I'm leaning no. I heard someone speculate that this coming cycle, Trump is going to team up with RFK and they're going to go independent, and Orange Man is going to endorse Orange Coin. But that's just some speculation in the streets of Austin. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, all bets are off. Like I don't know of any time in my life that was like this, and a lot of older and wiser people that I talk to don't know either. Like they don't know the analogies. So, I think you've got to stay humble in an environment like this.
So we saw the woman despairing, about her economic experience. What do you feel the influence of AI and unemployment? Do you see unemployment are we going to see a tipping point where society will look much different?
Yeah, like the influence of AI and unemployment in general. I think the main thing is just that because of all this artificially low interest rates and this money printing, the whole economy has gotten skewed. It's totally skewed, and there's so many malinvestments that have happened. Everything is skewed towards consumption in the moment. It's kind of like the travel, Instagram, and I'm I'm not casting any moral judgment on that. It's just how it is. People have been encouraged to buy the latest thing because you got 0 interest rate loans and everything. Like just lever up, buy your house even though you don't have the cash. Like just put 10% down and do it. And so people's savings have been so incredibly undermined, right? People don't really have any savings anymore on average. And so that consumerism, I think, is going to have to go away. Like you just tighten the belt at some point. Like this lady, she can't afford to go to Six Flags or whatever. Like it's just, try to get fuel for the car, try to get food, and that's about it. Pay the rent. So all that innovation, I feel like a lot of it has been like, I don't know, make Amazon more efficient or make Apple more efficient or customer service, like this whole service economy. I think that had to shrink anyway. So maybe AI is going to make that shrinkage go faster, maybe. But I just don't see AI helping us dig ditches, right? Or pull iron ore out of the ground or grow corn, right? I mean, some of it is maybe going to make a little difference, but I just don't think it's making a big difference in the next 10 years. Also, to run all this AI stuff, you need CPUs, and that's the bottleneck. The bottleneck is chips and energy, so you're back to your commodities again. So yeah, I think it's probably a bit, the peak of overly inflated expectations probably happened already with AI, at least in the short term, is what I think. Sorry? It might cause the crash. Yeah, I mean, like at some point, if things are so fragile, if a forest is like totally dried up, you only need a little spark, and there's no knowing where it's going to come from. But you're right, something like that could also be a spark. Yeah, I got to wrap it up here. Thanks, everyone.
Grandpa, why do you have so much Bitcoin?
Well, it all started in the year 2023 when I attended a conference called BitBlockBoom.
What's BitBlockBoom, Grandpa?
It was a conference where people talked about Bitcoin. This was way back when we used something called the US dollar for money.
What? Bitcoin wasn't always the world's money?
If it weren't for great speakers at BitBlockBoom like Jimmy Song, Adam Curry, and Preston Pish, we'd all be living in pods and eating bugs. Instead, I was able to avoid fiat enslavement and secure generational wealth.
F***ing legend.
Be the legend your grandchildren deserve. Experience the best Bitcoin conference out there and join the Bitcoin revolution. BitBlockBoom, the only conference for true Bitcoin maximalists. Book your tickets today at bitblockboom.com and use the code BBB1 for a special discount.